10 seconds. That is the window that legal analysts, trial watchers, and now the appellate court system are focused on when they examine what happened inside a team tent at David Kai Kendall Stadium in Frisco, Texas, on April 2nd, 2025. Not the argument that preceded it, not the storm that started everything, not the 14 months of legal proceedings that followed. 10 seconds. Because when Collin County prosecutors sat down to build their case against Karmelo Anthony, they kept coming back to the same core argument. That within those 10 seconds, Karmelo Anthony made a series of choices that dismantled any legal claim to self-defense before the blade ever left the backpack. And on June 9, 2026, a jury of 12 people agreed, guilty of murder. 35 years. This is True Crime Vault, where we go deeper than the headlines and follow the evidence wherever it actually leads. We are going to walk through exactly what those 10 seconds contain, why prosecutors argued they were so legally significant, and what the defense said in response. We are also going to look at where this case stands right now, because the verdict is not the end of this story, not even close. Before we get into it, please subscribe to True Crime Vault right now and hit the notification bell. We cover real cases with real depth week after week, and we follow these stories long after the cameras move on. If you want to understand what actually happened and what happens next, this is the channel for it. Hit that like button too. It genuinely helps this community grow. Now, let us start at the very beginning of April 2nd, 2025, because the 10 seconds we are examining do not exist in isolation. They are the product of everything that came before them that morning, and you cannot understand the legal argument without understanding the full picture. Austin Metcalf was a junior at Memorial High School in Frisco. He was a varsity linebacker, an athlete with the kind of physical presence that commands attention on a football field. He had a twin brother named Hunter. They were at the school track and field championship together that morning. Two brothers doing what brothers do, showing up for their team, competing, living a completely ordinary Thursday. Karmelo Anthony was a student at Centennial High School, also in Frisco. He was 17 years old. He was a team captain for both his track and football programs. He had a 3.7 grade point average. He had 2 part-time jobs. He was weeks away from graduation. By every available measure, he was the kind of kid that teachers notice for the right reasons. These two young men had never met. They had no history, no grudge, no prior conflict. They were strangers who ended up in the same place at the same moment on a rainy spring morning in Texas. The weather is actually an important part of this story, and it is not a detail you can skip over. A severe thunderstorm moved into the Frisco area during the track meet, producing heavy rain and the kind of conditions that force hundreds of athletes to scramble for cover. The event went into a weather delay, and in that delay, in the chaos of teenagers rushing to stay dry, the tent situation became a flashpoint. The team tents at these events are small, canvas tops on 4 metal poles set up by each school for their own athletes. Under normal circumstances, they function fine. Under a weather delay with rain coming down hard and everyone looking for shelter at the same time, they become cramped, tense, and contested. Karmelo Anthony ended up seated inside the Memorial High School tent, the tent belonging to a rival school whose athletes were already under it. Witnesses at trial described him sitting on the metal bleachers within that tent structure, his backpack in his lap, staying dry. Memorial students began to notice him. The reaction was what you might expect from teenagers in a territorial high-pressure moment. They wanted him out. The confrontation that followed lasted approximately 2 minutes. Multiple witnesses testified about it at trial. Students described asking Karmelo to leave the tent repeatedly. Estimates at trial suggested it happened as many as 15 times. He did not leave. He remained seated. His hands stayed in or near his backpack throughout the exchange. Austin Metcalf became involved. He and his twin brother Hunter were among the Memorial students who approached Karmelo and told him to go. The verbal exchange escalated. According to witness testimony presented by the prosecution, Karmelo said at some point during that argument, "Touch me and find out," or a variation of that phrase, while keeping his hands concealed in his bag and warning that he had something inside it. That phrase and that gesture became central to the prosecution's case. Because here is where the 10 seconds begin. Here is where the legal analysis gets precise and uncomfortable and impossible to resolve cleanly on either side. Physical contact occurred. Austin Metcalf made contact with Karmelo Anthony. The exact nature of that contact, whether it was a push, a shove, a grab, or something else, was contested at trial. Different witnesses described it differently. The surveillance footage from the stadium cameras captured the general movement, but, as the defense pointed out repeatedly during the trial, the footage was recorded from cameras positioned high on light poles and press boxes, designed for wide-angle coverage of the track and field, not for close-up documentation of a confrontation under an awning. The footage was grainy, degraded by the storm, pixelated to the point where faces were not clearly identifiable and precise hand movements were difficult to distinguish. But something happened physically. And within what prosecutors described as 10 seconds of that physical contact, Karmelo Anthony had already reached into his backpack, retrieved a folding knife, deployed it, and driven the blade into Austin Metcalf's chest one time. One strike. Austin Metcalf ran down the bleachers after being stabbed, grabbing his chest, calling for help. When law enforcement arrived, he was unresponsive. Athletic trainers were performing chest compressions. He was transported to a hospital and pronounced deceased shortly after arrival. Collin County Chief Medical Examiner Dr. Elizabeth Ventura testified at trial that the wound to Austin Metcalf's chest had reached his heart. A single knife strike, and he was gone, now. The prosecution's argument was built around exactly what those 10 seconds reveal about intent. And this is the part that the defense spent the entire trial trying to reframe, because the two sides interpreted the same 10 seconds in ways that could not be more different. The prosecution's position was this: a folding knife does not deploy itself. Using one is not a reflexive, unconscious action the way flinching or throwing an arm up might be. It requires a sequence of deliberate steps. You have to decide to reach into the bag. You have to locate the knife among everything else in there. You have to pull it out. You have to open the blade, which on a folding knife requires intentional physical action to lock into place. You have to grip it, and then you have to use it. That sequence, prosecutors argued, takes conscious decision-making at every single step. Each step is a choice. And Karmelo Anthony made all of those choices in the 10 seconds after Austin Metcalf made physical contact. The prosecution also pointed to what Karmelo had said before the physical contact. "Touch me and find out," with his hands already in the backpack, already near or on the knife. Prosecutors argued that this was not the statement of someone who was frightened and unprepared for what was coming. It was the statement of someone who had already decided what they were going to do if the line was crossed. District Attorney Bill Werski called it a sneak attack. He told the jury that Karmelo had essentially provoked Austin Metcalf into making contact by refusing to leave, by staying seated, by issuing a challenge, and then used a concealed weapon to win the confrontation instantly once that contact happened. The prosecution argued this was not self-defense. It was a provoked, unjustified homicide, and then there was the body camera footage from the arrest. Officer Eduardo Cortez detained Karmelo Anthony near the stadium not long after the stabbing. The arrest was captured on body camera, as the officer communicated to dispatch that he had the alleged suspect in custody. Karmelo Anthony responded to the word, alleged. He said, according to court records, "I'm not alleged, I did it." The prosecution played that audio for the jury. They argued it was a spontaneous admission captured on camera in the immediate aftermath of the stabbing, with no coaching and no time for calculation. They called it a confession. They argued it showed no remorse, no confusion, no shock, just a flat, matter-of-fact acknowledgement that he had stabbed Austin Metcalf. By the time the prosecution rested, they had presented nearly 24 witnesses. They had walked the jury through the physical mechanics of deploying a folding knife. They had shown the surveillance footage. They had played the body camera audio. They had introduced testimony from the medical examiner about the nature of Austin Metcalf's wound. It was a comprehensive, sequentially organized case built around a single central thesis. In those 10 seconds, Karmelo Anthony made choices. And those choices were not self-defense. The defense's response to all of this was not to deny the facts. They could not. The stabbing happened. Austin Metcalf died. Karmelo Anthony was present and had the knife. Those things were not in dispute. What the defense disputed was the legal interpretation of those 10 seconds. And their argument rested on 3 main pillars. The first was the physical reality of the confrontation. The defense established at trial that Austin Metcalf was significantly larger than Karmelo Anthony. Austin stood at 6 feet 1 inch and weighed approximately 215 pounds. He was a varsity linebacker, an athlete whose body had been built and trained specifically for physical impact and overpowering opponents. Karmelo Anthony was 5 feet 8 and weighed approximately 130 pounds. The difference between them was roughly 85 pounds. In any structured athletic or combat context, those 2 individuals would never be matched against each other because the physical disparity is too significant to make the contest fair. The defense argued that this physical reality is the essential context for understanding what happened in those 10 seconds. Karmelo was seated. He was on the metal bleachers inside the tent, surrounded by students from a rival school, with bleachers behind him and people in front of him. He had limited ability to move freely. When a person who outweighed him by 85 pounds, a varsity football player, made forceful physical contact with him, the defense argued that the situation triggered a genuine and reasonable fear of serious physical harm. Under Texas law, a person is justified in using force against another when they reasonably believe that force is immediately necessary to protect themselves against the other person's use of unlawful force. The key standard is what a reasonable person in the same circumstances would have believed. The defense argued that a reasonable person, a 17-year-old 5'8", 130-pound kid, seated, surrounded, with no clear path to retreat, just shoved by a 215-pound athlete, would have believed they were in immediate danger. The second pillar of the defense's argument was the contested nature of the surveillance footage. They pushed back hard on the prosecution's characterization of what the tape showed. The cameras were mounted high and far from the tent. The storm degraded the image quality significantly. The defense argued the prosecution was essentially projecting a narrative onto a blurry, ambiguous recording and asking the jury to accept that narrative as definitive. They pointed out that the footage could not clearly establish the sequence of contact. Who moved toward whom first? What exactly the physical exchange looked like? Whether Karmelo had already begun reaching for the knife before Austin touched him or only after? That sequence question matters enormously for the self-defense analysis. If Karmelo reached for the knife before any physical contact was made, while Austin was approaching but before anyone touched anyone, that significantly weakens the self-defense argument. If he reached for it only in response to being physically struck or shoved, that is a different legal analysis. The defense argued the tape was not clear enough to establish which of those things happened, and that the prosecution was asking the jury to guess and then treat their guess as proven fact. The third pillar was the recontextualization of the body camera statement. The defense did not deny that Karmelo said, "I'm not alleged, I did it," but they argued the prosecution had stripped the statement of its surrounding context. They pointed to other statements Karmelo made in those same moments, to a coach, to officers, in which he said things like, "He put his hands on me, I told him not to." The defense argued these statements, taken together, showed not a cold-blooded admission of guilt, but a teenager who believed he had acted in self-defense and was being transparent about it, who felt no need to lie because he genuinely believed the law was on his side. Defense attorney Michael Howard also called witnesses who offered a different account of the physical dynamic. A student from Memorial High School testified that Austin Metcalf had made the first physical move. Coach Adam Linwood from Centennial High testified that in his experience, it was not unusual for athletes from different schools to share tent space during weather delays, directly contradicting the prosecution's framing of Karmelo's presence in the memorial tent as calculated and provocative. Karmelo Anthony did not testify in his own defense. That decision is entirely within a defendant's rights under the United States Constitution. The Fifth Amendment guarantees that no one can be compelled to testify against themselves, and jurors are instructed not to draw negative inferences from the exercise of that right. But the decision not to testify also means the jury never heard Karmelo's own account of what was in his mind during those 10 seconds. They never heard him describe what he felt when Austin Metcalf made contact with him. They never heard him explain in his own voice whether he was acting from fear or from something else. That contrast with the Case Allison case in Belton, Texas from May of 2022 has been discussed extensively in the months since the Anthony verdict. Allison also used a knife in a confrontation at a Texas high school. He also claimed self-defense. He testified. The video in his case clearly showed the other student throwing the first punch. The jury acquitted him of murder and convicted him only of criminally negligent homicide, which carried a maximum sentence of 2 years. The physical disparity in the Allison case and the nature of the video evidence both differed from the Anthony case in ways that matter legally. But the comparison refuses to go away. On June 9, 2026, after less than 3 hours of deliberation, the jury returned a guilty verdict on the charge of murder. They had been given the option to consider manslaughter, which would have required only a finding of recklessness and carried a maximum of 20 years. They chose not to convict on manslaughter. They went to murder. And in the sentencing phase, they gave Karmelo Anthony 35 years. His mother testified during sentencing. She took the stand and told the courtroom that her son was sorry. She asked for mercy. Whatever was in those 10 seconds, whatever the jury concluded about intent and choices in self-defense, a mother was standing in a courtroom asking 12 strangers to have compassion for her child. Austin Metcalf's family sat through all of it. Every piece of footage, every witness, every argument about what those 10 seconds contained. They buried their son. They watched his twin brother Hunter carry the weight of that morning into every day that followed. No verdict changes what April 2nd took from them. And here is what is important to understand about where this case goes from here, because the guilty verdict was not the final word. Less than 24 hours after sentencing, Michael Howard filed a formal notice of appeal on Karmelo Anthony's behalf. He stated publicly that there are several important legal issues for appellate courts to consider. He did not specify them all in that initial statement, but anyone who followed the trial knows what the primary argument is going to be. During jury selection, the prosecution used 3 of their final peremptory strikes to remove the last 3 black prospective jurors from the pool. Every one of them. The defense filed a Batson challenge immediately, a constitutional objection based on the 1986 Supreme Court ruling in Batson versus Kentucky, which prohibits the use of peremptory strikes to exclude jurors on the basis of race. The prosecution offered a race-neutral explanation. All 3 women worked as educators, and in a case centered on a school event involving student-athletes, they argued educators might carry professional bias. Judge John Roach Jr. accepted that explanation and denied the challenge. The jury that was seated, 12 jurors, 6 alternates, contained no black jurors, not one. In a racially charged case that had divided the country for over a year, with a black defendant and a white victim, the jury box had no black representation. That issue is now going to the 5th District Court of Appeals in Dallas. Appellate courts reviewing Batson claims conduct a specific and detailed analysis. They look at whether similarly situated jurors of different races were questioned the same way and treated the same way. If there was a white educator who was seated on that jury while 3 black educators were struck, the prosecution's race-neutral justification becomes very difficult to sustain. The full voir dire transcript, every question, every answer, every strike, is on the official record and available for the appellate court to examine line by line. Batson challenges have reversed murder convictions in Texas before. The Black Man case, the Miller versus Cockrell case. The standard is not whether the prosecutor gave a plausible reason. The standard, on appeal, is whether that reason holds up under actual scrutiny. That scrutiny has not happened yet. It is coming. In the meantime, Karmelo Anthony was transferred to the Texas Department of Criminal Justice on June 10th, the morning after sentencing. He was processed through the intake facility in Huntsville and will be assigned to a permanent unit somewhere in the Texas prison system. He is 19 years old. The case has also continued to generate significant online activity since the verdict. Fundraising campaigns on both sides raised hundreds of thousands of dollars during the lead-up to the trial. Social media brought enormous noise, including documented disinformation, a fake autopsy report that spread widely on X before it was debunked by the Frisco Police Department, and false claims about the Anthony family's use of donated funds that were investigated and found to be inaccurate by fact-checking organizations. Both families faced harassment serious enough that law enforcement opened investigations. Both fathers were forced to leave their jobs due to doxing. The trial itself was supposed to cut through all of that noise and deliver a clear legal answer. Whether it succeeded in that depends entirely on who you ask. What it did not do, what no trial could do, is answer the human question underneath all of this. What should have happened on the morning of April 2, 2025, to make sure that Austin Metcalf went home to his family? What should have happened so that Karmelo Anthony, weeks from graduation, with 2 jobs and a team captain's role and a future ahead of him, never ended up in a Collin County courtroom? The legal system answers the question it is designed to answer. Did the evidence beyond a reasonable doubt support a finding of murder? The jury said yes. But those 10 seconds, the sequence of decisions inside a crowded, rain-soaked tent, are going to be examined and re-examined in courtrooms and law journals and conversations for years to come, because they sit at the intersection of every complicated question this case raises about self-defense law, about physical disparity, about race and jury composition, about what it means to be terrified and what it means to make a choice. Austin Metcalf was 17 years old. He was a son and a brother and an athlete and a kid with a whole life in front of him. He went to a track meet on a Thursday morning and he did not come home. Karmelo Anthony was 17 years old when those 10 seconds happened. He is 19 now, inside the Texas prison system, waiting for an appellate court to decide whether the process that convicted him was constitutionally sound. Both of those things are true at the same time, and that is what makes this case so difficult to look away from, and so important to keep following carefully. True Crime Vault is going to be here for every development, every appellate ruling, every update. Because cases like this one, cases where the legal questions are genuinely hard, where the human cost is genuinely devastating on multiple sides, where the racial and social context cannot be separated from the legal analysis, are exactly the cases that deserve careful, sustained attention. If this case matters to you, subscribe right now. Hit the notification bell, leave your thoughts in the comments. Tell me what you think those 10 seconds actually show. Tell me whether the self-defense argument should have held. Tell me whether the appellate court is going to find something in that voir dire transcript. This conversation is ongoing, and every single one of your perspectives contributes to it. These are not just cases. These are real people, real families, real grief that started in 10 seconds and has not stopped since. True Crime Vault. We will see you in the next investigation. Let us go back inside that tent one more time, because the 10 seconds that the prosecution built their case around did not arrive without warning. They were preceded by approximately 2 minutes of escalating confrontation that the trial record documented in considerable detail, and understanding that 2-minute window is essential to understanding why the self-defense question was so legally contested. When Karmelo Anthony sat down in the Memorial High School tent, the track meet was already in a weather delay. The rain had come in hard and fast, the way Texas storms do in spring. Athletes from across the event were scrambling for any available shelter. The conditions inside those tents shifted quickly from comfortable team gathering spots to crowded, loud, anxious spaces where nobody had room to breathe and everyone was already on edge from the disrupted competition. Witnesses described Karmelo as sitting quietly at first. He was not making noise, not drawing attention intentionally. He was in a tent that belonged to a rival school, but in the practical chaos of a storm delay, the lines between designated spaces had blurred. Track meets are not football games. Athletes from different schools interact regularly at these events. They compete in the same lanes, warm up in the same areas, and in normal circumstances, nobody gives much thought to who is standing near whom. But circumstances were not normal that morning. The storm had compressed everyone into small spaces. Tension was already running through the air, and when Memorial students began to notice that a kid from Centennial High was seated in their tent, their space, their designated area, something shifted. The confrontation started small. A few looks, a few words. Coach Adam Linwood from Centennial High testified at trial that it was not unusual for students from different schools to share tent space. But the memorial students clearly felt differently in that moment, and the group dynamic took on a momentum of its own. Austin and Hunter Metcalf were among the students who approached Karmelo. Austin was a linebacker. He was physically imposing in the way that varsity football players are, not in an aggressive way necessarily, just in the way that a 215-pound athlete commands physical space. When he walked toward someone and told them to leave, it carried a weight that a verbal request from a smaller person simply does not. The 2 minutes that followed were described by witnesses as repeatedly escalating despite repeated opportunities for de-escalation. Karmelo was asked to leave multiple times. He did not leave. Witnesses gave different reasons for why. Some said he was being defiant. Others implied that the layout of the tent, bleachers behind him, crowd in front, storm outside, made it genuinely difficult to simply stand up and walk away into a downpour surrounded by people who wanted him gone. The phrase attributed to Karmelo during those 2 minutes, "Touch me and find out," became one of the most analyzed statements of the entire trial. The prosecution used it as evidence of intent. Here was a teenager, they argued, who was not frightened or backed into a corner. Here was someone issuing a challenge, daring another person to make physical contact, with his hands already near or inside the backpack where the knife was. The defense's counter was that the statement had to be understood in context. A 17-year-old, outnumbered, being told over and over to leave a space he was physically trapped in, surrounded by a rival team, with a much larger person bearing down on him. Bravado under those circumstances, they argued, does not equal a plan. It equals a scared kid trying to hold his ground because he does not know what else to do. There is a particular quality to how human beings respond to perceived threat in enclosed spaces. People who work in crisis intervention, in conflict de-escalation, in adolescent psychology. They will tell you that teenagers in high-pressure group confrontations often make statements and take positions that look like aggression from the outside, but are actually driven by fear and the social dynamics of not being seen to back down. Whether that was what was happening with Karmelo Anthony in those 2 minutes is something the jury had to determine, and something the trial record cannot conclusively answer. What the record does establish is the physical contact. Austin Metcalf made physical contact with Karmelo Anthony. Under oath, witnesses, including witnesses who testified for the prosecution, confirmed that Austin was the one who initiated the physical exchange. One student witness for the defense specifically testified that Austin grabbed or shoved Karmelo. A prosecution witness described Austin standing up and pushing Karmelo to get him out of the tent. That moment of physical contact is the hinge point. Everything before it is context. Everything after it is the 10 seconds. The prosecution's argument was that Karmelo had engineered the situation to reach that moment, that the "touch me and find out" statement was effectively a setup, that he had wanted someone to make contact so he could justify using the knife he was already holding or reaching for. They argued the physical disparity, while real, did not legally justify lethal force in response to a shove. Texas law permits deadly force only when a person reasonably believes it is immediately necessary to prevent death or serious bodily injury to themselves. A shove, the prosecution argued, even from a much larger person, does not automatically meet that threshold. The defense's position was that the legal standard requires looking at the totality of the circumstances as Karmelo experienced them, not just the shove in isolation, the shove in the context of being surrounded, being significantly outsized, having no clear path to exit, having already been told in front of a crowd to get out, with the social humiliation and threat escalation that comes with that. The defense argued that a reasonable person in that exact position could genuinely have believed, in that split second after physical contact, that they were about to be seriously hurt. Texas law also contains what is known as a duty to retreat doctrine, or rather a significant limitation on it. Texas is a state with strong castle doctrine provisions, and the law recognizes that a person is not required to retreat before using force in defense of themselves if they are in a place they have a right to be, and they have not provoked the conflict. Whether Karmelo had a right to be in that tent, and whether his actions constituted provocation, were exactly the questions the jury was wrestling with. The prosecution's answer was clear. He had no right to be in that tent. He was in a rival school's designated space. He had been asked to leave repeatedly, and refused. His refusal and his verbal statement constituted provocation. Therefore, the duty to retreat limitation did not apply in his favor, and the use of deadly force was not justified. The defense's answer was equally clear but pointed in the opposite direction. Being in a shared public space, even a rival school's tent area, did not strip Karmelo of his right to defend himself once physical violence was initiated against him. He did not have a legal obligation to successfully flee into a storm through a crowd of angry rival athletes before he could lawfully protect himself. The jury rejected the self-defense argument in under 3 hours. What that means practically is that 12 people looked at the 10 seconds. The sequence from first physical contact to a single knife strike, and concluded that Karmelo Anthony's response was not that of someone acting in reasonable fear of immediate serious harm. It was, in their determination, an intentional act of murder. But here is what is worth sitting with, now that the verdict has been delivered, and the appeal has been filed, and the case has entered a new phase. The jury's verdict is a legal finding. It is not a comprehensive moral or factual accounting of everything that happened on April 2, 2025. Legal verdicts never are. They are determinations made by 12 human beings, working with the evidence presented to them, applying legal standards that were explained to them by a judge, in a process that, as the pending appellate challenge argues, may have been flawed from the very beginning in how that jury was selected. The voir dire record that the 5th District Court of Appeals will examine is going to tell a story. It will show how each of the nearly 600 prospective jurors was questioned. It will show which ones were struck and why. It will show whether the 3 black prospective jurors who were removed through the prosecution's final peremptory challenges were treated differently from white prospective jurors who shared similar backgrounds. Specifically, it will show whether there were white educators in that jury pool who were not struck. Because if there were, the prosecution's race-neutral explanation starts to look a great deal less neutral. SMU law professor Anna Offet noted in the days after the verdict that Batson challenges are rarely won at the trial level, but that appellate courts apply a more searching analysis. Former federal prosecutor Cooley Stimpson identified the Batson issue as the most significant appellate ground in this case. Legal analyst community at the Davis Vanguard publication noted that what matters on appeal is not whether a race-neutral reason was offered. It is whether that reason survives real scrutiny. Real scrutiny is coming, in downtown Dallas, from the 5th District Court of Appeals, probably sometime in 2027, given how these timelines typically work, possibly later. And while that scrutiny unfolds, Austin Metcalf's family continues to live in the aftermath of losing him. Hunter Metcalf carries his twin's absence with him every day. Their father, who condemned the far-right protest groups that tried to use his son's death as a symbol for their own purposes, who showed up at a press conference held by the Anthony family and tried to find common ground, has spoken publicly about his desire to see this case treated as what it actually was, a tragedy, not a racial battle. Austin Metcalf did not deserve to be turned into a banner for anyone's ideology. He deserved to go home from a track meet. Karmelo Anthony's mother stood in a courtroom and asked for mercy. His legal team filed an appeal within 24 hours of the verdict. The community of people who believe he was treated unjustly, including organizations like the Next Generation Action Network, which pledged $10,000 toward his appeal, continues to advocate for him. His supporters point to the all-white jury. They point to the 35-year sentence in contrast to what Case Allison received. They point to the physical reality of what Karmelo faced in that tent. They are not going away. None of these threads resolve cleanly. None of the grief on either side of this case fits into a simple verdict. What does fit into a simple statement is this. On April 2nd, 2025, 2 17-year-olds whose paths had never crossed ended up in the same storm, under the same tent, and 10 seconds changed everything for both of them. One of them is gone. The other is in a Texas prison filing an appeal. Their families will carry this forever. And the legal system, slowly, grinding, imperfect as it is, continues to try to figure out what justice looks like here. True Crime Vault is going to keep following it. Every ruling, every development, every update on the appeal and wherever this case travels through the court system from here. Subscribe to this channel and hit the notification bell so you never miss an update on this case or any of the other investigations we are tracking. Leave your thoughts below. I genuinely want to know whether you believe the 10 seconds at the center of this case support the murder conviction or whether you see something different. This is the kind of case where the conversation matters. These are real people, real lives, and they deserve to be remembered with honesty, with complexity, and with the attention this case demands. True Crime Vault. We unlock the cases that deserve to be remembered.